Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Uh, I think last time we talked about snake bites, which we concluded everything here. And today we are supposed to look at fractures, types of fractures, yeah, and the management. So not to waste too much time today, we can go direct to our today's lesson. So here we already talked about all these, including all these types of the snakes that are venomous and non-venomous, and what should we do or what can be done if someone has been bitten by a snake. So let's scroll up. Here we already talked about a venomous bite and non-venomous bite. Let's move. We talked about the snake factors, snake bite factors. Also talked about what you should do during the first aid and what you shouldn't do here. Yeah. So let's move. All these we already discussed last time. The do's and don'ts, the things that you cannot do. We talked about all these things here. If you remember very well what we discussed last time, like where it says take the patient to a tantric or a snake charm for treatment, where you can use charm for someone who has been bitten by a snake. Those things you don't do. Then mobilize the affected limb. This can do. We already discussed this. So let's scroll up everything here we did. Oh no. Here is where now we are focusing on. So let's go straight to on today's lesson where it says broken bones and fractures. Broken bones and fractures. So broken bones and fractures. Okay, so let's go straight. So definitions here. So by the definition, a broken or crack in a bone is called a fracture. I will repeat the definition again. A break or crack in a bone is called a fracture. Okay, so in most cases the damage to the bone will be under the skin excuse me, which is called a closed fracture. In most cases the damage to the bone will be under the skin, which is called a closed fracture. So in most cases this damage of the bone that will be under the skin, they are usually called the closed fracture. Okay, so let's move from explaining the definition this point. So now we're going to point number 3. So let's move. But sometimes bites of the bone can puncture through the skin to become an open fracture. But sometimes bites of the bone can puncture through the skin to become an open fracture. Okay, so these are just straightforward points. Then let's go now point number 4. Okay, so in both cases you need to treat the casualty for shock. So always you treat the patient for shock. In both cases you need to treat the casualty for shock. Okay, so make sure that you always treat the patient for shock in both cases, either an open fracture or a closed fracture. Don't worry, we'll show you the pictures of the bones of the same fractures that we are talking about. So let's move here. Even if you can't see any blood, the break might have caused some internal bleeding. That's the reason why you must always treat for shock, both closed and open fracture. That's why I say even if you can't see any blood, the break might have caused some internal bleeding. And you know the internal bleedings are very bad because you can't know that someone is bleeding internally, and such kind of conditions are very critical for someone to manage. Yeah, so let's move. So to break a fully grown bone, a huge amount of force is needed. To break a fully grown bone, a huge amount of force is needed. Then, but bones that are still growing are simple and can split, crack, or bend quite easily, a bit like a twig. Okay, so but bones that are still growing are simple and can split, crack, or bend quickly, easily, a bit like a twig. Okay, so what they're trying to say here is these bones that can be easily that are still growing when you are still young are simple and can split, crack, or bend quickly, quite easily, a bit like a twig. So if you are still young, you find that maybe you are still young, meaning if you have maybe you have a fracture or a broken bone, meaning for you at least you have still that chance for recovering quickly, as well as to become very strong again, because your bones are still growing, and compared to someone who is already aged, someone who is already aged, it is hard for the bones to recover very well and to become more stable. Those they live with injuries, but for children who are still young adults, the ones they have a fracture, they can recover it very nicely and become more stable like they was before. Though they can have a little bit some complications, but it won't be as affected as much as compared to an adult person. Yeah, so let's move. So here is where you're seeing fracture. So signs. So under signs we have the 7 things to look for are so number 1, we look at talking about the signs fracture. So the 7 things that we should look at. Number 1 is swelling. Check for swelling. If the leg is swelling, the feet are swelling, or either the hands, you check. Then difficult moving, you check. Once you tell the patient or the casualty, try to move your right leg, the one that you said has been broken or is paining. Then you find that the patient, as is trying to lift the leg, is failing. You'll be able to tell that there is a fracture. Again, then movement in an unnatural direction. So if you try to tell the patient, try to move your hand, like maybe to your left or up or back, you find that the patient will find difficulties to do that. So by doing so, you'll be able to tell that this person is having the fracture. So these are the signs that you can tell. Then another point, that's point number 4. A limb that looks shorter, twisted, or bent. These are signs that you can tell. A limb that looks shorter, twisted, or bent. You can tell that this person have a fracture. Okay, are we together? So let's move. By the way, we discussed about the signs and symptoms, whereby you say signs is something that you can see even if you are not a victim. The condition is to someone else, you'll be able to tell or to observe because of the signs. But symptoms, only the patient, the one who is feeling that pain or that illness, is the one that can tell you what he or she is feeling. Yes. Then let's move point number 5. A grating noise for feeling. Grating noise or feeling. Okay. Then number 6, loss of strength. So I find that this casualty, most they will lose strength. They cannot stand, they cannot balance on their own. They will need something to lean on, they need something to hold so that they can stand up or start walking. So you can see that there is a fracture. Yes. So number 7, that is a shock. Like I always say, make sure that you treat in both conditions, either closed fracture or open fracture, because you might never know that there is a hemorrhage, which is severe internal bleeding, and severe internal bleeding it can easily lead to death. Yes. So let's move. We are number point where we say types of fracture. So we have what we call complete fracture. So here, a complete fracture or a complete break of the bone, causing it to be separated into 2 or more spaces. That is a complete fracture. So a complete fracture, it's a complete break of the bone, causing it to be separated into 2 or more pieces. So that is a complete fracture. It makes the bones to get separated into 2 or more pieces. Then you'll be able to tell that this is a complete fracture. Then incomplete, meaning it's just the opposite. So incomplete fracture here, incomplete fracture or a green stick fracture occurs when the bone cracks and bends but does not completely break. So this one is not completely breaks, where it completely breaks into 2 or more pieces. Then this one does just bend or crack, but it does not completely break. That's incomplete fracture. Then there is what we call closed fracture. So closed fracture is a fracture that does not break the skin. This is also called a simple fracture. Okay, closed fracture, a fracture that does not break the skin. This is also called a simple fracture. So this one, it's more like a minor fracture, that is, though it needs medical attention, but does not break the skin. So it's called a simple fracture. Then we have number 4 here, types of fracture, where I say open fracture. So an open fracture is which the bone breaks through the skin and can be seen outside the leg, or there is a deep wound that exposes the bone through the skin. This is called a compound fracture. So this one is different from closed. Open, it breaks the skin and you can able to tell or see through the skin. Then let's go. There's what we call number 5, where we call commutated fracture. In these cases, the bone is broken into several fragments. This is serious because there will be muscle damage with more bleeding at the fracture site. Okay, so commutated fracture, in these cases the bone is broken into several fragments. This is serious because there will be muscle damage with more bleeding at the fracture site. Okay, so these are the types of the bone. So here is completely, that is completely fracture, then incomplete fracture, then closed open fracture, then commutated. This is commutated fracture. So you can see the differences here. This one is completely broken into two or more pieces. This one is not completely. This one is closed, is completely cut. As you can see, open fracture, you can see from the skin. The one we are talking about, you'll be able to tell from the skin. Then this one that has been broken into pieces, commutated fracture. Yeah. So that's what those things we are talking about or trying to explain. Yeah. So make sure that you know the types of fracture. We have type number 1, the one that we call complete fracture. Number 2, incomplete fracture. Number 3, closed. Number 4, open fracture. Then number 5, commutated fracture. 5 types of fracture. In case the question has come, list 5 types of fracture and explain. You should know all these things. Okay, so let's try to move a bit. Types of fracture. So we have where we said this is, let me see first. Okay, yeah. So types of fracture. So impacted fracture. So this is another type of fracture. So impacted fracture. After a heavy fall, the fracture may be impacted by the force, spinal injury, falling from a tree. So that is the impacted fracture. So impacted fracture after a heavy fall. So this one is caused by a heavy fall. It can be maybe a tree, it can be a wall fence, it can be anything. For the fracture may be impacted by the force. It can be the spinal injury, falling from the tree. That's what they're trying to explain. Then there is pathological fracture here. So the pathological fracture, these occur when the bone is weakened by loss of calcium, infection, or cancer. Minimal cause a break in such cases. In old age, the bones are more brittle and may break spontaneously due to calcium loss, which is part of the ingain process. Okay, so I'll repeat this point again. So pathological fracture, these occur when the bone is weakened by loss of calcium, infection, or cancer. So meaning a minimal cause a break in such cases. In old age, the bones are more brittle and may break spontaneously due to calcium loss. So here, more especially to aged people or old people, the bones can break spontaneously because these people, they mostly have insufficient calcium. That's what this point is trying to elaborate. So let's go and look at the point number 3, where it says stress fracture. Stress fracture is caused by repeated minor trauma. As in an athletic training involved in strenuous training such as jogging or marathon running. Wow, this is so interesting. Those who like the activities of gymnastics, athletics, and those that like my colleague here, but never mind, let's proceed. So I'll repeat this point again. Stress fractures caused by repeated minor trauma, as in athletic training, are involved in strenuous training such as jogging or marathon running. Okay, so let's move. So here are the types of the bones of these are types of impacted fracture, pathological fracture, and stress fractures. So as you can see, osteoporosis, normal bone, bone with osteoporosis. Okay, so here these are just the types of the bone. You can't focus much on this. Actually, this is not much into you, because it's supposed to be done by the surgeon, those people that are specialized in these things, more especially people that are doctors that studied completely surgery course or program. Yeah, so let's move. Excuse me. So here is just an explanation of types of fractures, where we talked of impacted fracture, stressed fracture. So as you can see, these are repeated fracture for athletes, those that like jogging, as you can see from the muscles. So just an explanation of what you have already discussed here. Yeah, pathological fracture, all those things. So let's move. Types of bone fracture. So under types of bone fracture, we have what we call transverse bone fracture, we have what we call linear, oblique, medial placed, oblique, medial placed, or nodis placed. Then there's also the difference is that this one, oblique, displaced, the bone is completely cut here, but oblique, nodis placed, the bone is not cut, just the fracture that you can see, but is not break into two or more pieces. So here it does not break into two or more pieces, then here it has been complete break. Then we have a spiral, then a green stick, the last one comminuted fracture. So you can find time to read these or to master this type of fractures, but don't worry about all these things if you are not focusing much on them, but to know part of it, it is good to help you, more especially in the first aid. Okay, so let's proceed. This is the skull. So we have compound fracture, then also have a linear fracture, then the last one is displaced fracture, which affect the brain now. Yeah, so here where you are seeing arrow, this is the occipital bone, this is the occipital bone part, then this is the brain part, and this is just the skull part, linear fracture. Okay, so let's scroll. Yeah, so depressed fracture of skull here, then we have linear skull fracture, and the last one, which is compound skull fracture. So this is the compound skull fracture. Okay, so you can see, as you can see here, this is where they are talking about, and this is where they are talking about here, this part, as well as how you are seeing this. Okay, all right, let's move management. So under the management, if management A, if it is an open fracture, cover the wound with a sterile dressing and secure it with a bandage. If it is an open fracture, cover the wound with a sterile dressing and secure it with a bandage. So apply pressure around the wound to control any bleeding. Remember that the aim is to stop the bleeding, either internal or external bleeding. It can be either an open fracture or closed fracture. Yes, I guess by now you are familiar with these terms. When you say open fracture, it is a fracture that has not been break into two or more pieces, but closed fracture, it is the opposite, as well as the complete fracture. So let's proceed. Management B, where it says, after here you have applied pressure around the wound to control any bleeding, then support the injured body part to stop it from moving. This should ease any pain and prevent any further damage. I'll repeat this point. Support the injured body part to stop it from moving. This should ease any pain and prevent any further damage. Okay, then C, once you have done this, call medical help. While waiting for help to arrive, don't move them unless they are in immediate danger. Meaning, once you have done all those, you put the bandage, you make them to feel at least a bit comfortable to prevent the further damage or pain. After you call for an ambulance or for an emergency, or as you're waiting for a transport, make sure they shouldn't move, not until the help has arrived, unless if there is any sense of danger, that's when you can move the casualties. So on management D, where it says protect the what is happening, the screen has gone to yes, so that you can see properly. Okay, so protect the injured area by using bandages to secure it to any uninjured part of the body to stop it from moving. For example, fractures on the arm can be secured with a slight, and a leg with a fracture can be tied to the uninjured leg. Okay, so I'll repeat this point. Protect the injured area by using bandages to secure it to an injured part of the body to stop it from moving. For example, fracture on the arm can be secured with a sling, and a leg with a fracture can be tied to the uninjured leg. So let's continue. That is the management E, where it says keep checking the casualty for signs of shock. This does not mean emotion shock, but is a life-threatening condition, often caused by losing blood. So by the way, I'll keep on reminding you what it means when you say signs, the difference between signs and symptoms. So the signs, like we always say, it's something that you can just observe or see from the distance that this person is having this problem or this condition. For instance, you know the normal color for eyes. Find that someone, the eyes look like reddish, you'll be able to tell that something is wrong. Or maybe swelling on the face, you'll be able to tell that something is wrong. So those things that you are seeing in someone are the ones that we call signs. Then symptoms is something that you can't see. More especially, you are not a victim, or you are not the one who is feeling that pain or ill, unless the person who is ill is the one who can tell you that me, I'm feeling this and that, and by so you call them as symptoms because they're being felt by the casualty. Okay, let's move. Number point, that is F, under management. If they lose responsiveness at any point, open their airway, check their breathing, and prepare to treat someone who is becoming unresponsive. So that is someone is going unconscious, is undergo unconscious unconscious. Remember, we talked about triagen, where we mentioned the issue of A, B, and C, where we say A stands for airway, then B stands for breathing, then C stands for circulation. I think you still remember all these things. That's where this point number F is going. If they lose responsiveness at any point, open their airway, meaning this person now is having the difficulties in breathing. So you open their airway, check their breathing, and prepare to treat someone who is becoming unresponsive. This person is going now, cannot respond to anything, to any pain, meaning is now going unconscious state. Okay, so how you can lift the casualty, this is just the explaining for the management how these things can be done. This is how you can tighten the bandage to balance the injured part. You can take like this. So these are form of how this bandage can be put to a casualty, depending on the condition. That's what this picture is trying to explain here. Okay, so let's move. As you've seen here, what has been done, how they have covered the broken legs. So in order to make sure that the patient is stable and to prevent the further damage. Okay, let's move. So I guess for today's lesson we are done. So tomorrow or next time when we meet, we're going to look at poisoning. So that's the next lecture once when we meet. I hope that today's lesson was okay and you have understood. Where you are not clear, please find time to ask questions. I know you have a timetable where you're supposed to, there are some days where you're supposed to ask questions, so please find time to ask questions where you are not clear or for further guidance or clarifications. Sure. Okay, have a nice day. See you in the next lecture. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe and like the channel at the end of this video, or even before on the same channel. Okay, this is Dr. Courage, and welcome at Supreme Institute of Applied Sciences and Technology. You are all warmly welcomed at this institution or college. Bye once more. Love you all.